5. Think of yourselves as a hand. Each of you is a finger, and without the others, you're useless. Alone, a finger can't grasp, or control, or form a fist. You are nothing on your own, and everything together. Commando Instructor Sergeant Skirata. Damin moved on fast, up a tree-covered slope a kilometer south. He planned on spending the rest of the daylight hours in a carefully constructed at the highest vantage point he could find, slightly below the skyline. He concentrated on making a crude net out of the canopy cords he had salvaged. The activity kept him occupied and alert. He hadn't slept in nearly 40 standard hours. Fatigue made you more careless and dangerously unfocused than alcohol. When he had finished tying the cord into squares, he wove grass, leaves, and twigs into the knots. On inspections, he decided it was a pretty good camouflage net. He also continued observation. Quilora was astonishing. It was alive and different, a riot of scent and color and texture and sounds. Now that his initial pounding fear had subsided into a general edginess, he began to take it all in. It was the little living noises that concerned him most. Around him, creatures crawled, flew, and buzzed. Occasionally, things squealed and fell silent. Twice now he'd heard something larger prowling in the bushes. Apart from the brief intensity of Geonosis, Damin's only environmental experience had been the elegant but enclosed stilt cities of Commando, and the endless churning seas around them. The cleanly efficient classrooms and barracks were where he had spent 10 years turning from innocent child to perfect soldier was unremarkable, designed to get a job done. His training in desert and mountain and jungle had been entirely artificial, hollow projections, simulations. The red desert plains of Geonosis had been far more arid and starkly magnificent than his instructor's imaginations. And now Quilora's fields and woods held so much more than three-dimensional charts could offer. It was still open country, though, a terrain that made it hard for him to move around unnoticed. Concentrate, he told himself. Gather intel. Make the most of your enforced idleness. Lunch would have been welcome about now. A decent lunch. He chewed on a concentrated dry ration cube and reminded himself that his constant hunger wasn't real. He was just tired. He had consumed the correct amount of nutrients for his needs. And if he gave in to eating more, he would run out of supplies. There was exactly enough for a week's operations in his pack, and 2 days' worth in his emergency belt. The belt was the only thing he would grab apart from his rifle. If he ever had to make a last-ditch run for it without his 40-kilo pack. Beneath him, farm transports passed along a narrow track, all heading in the same directions, carrying square tanks with security seals on the hatches. Bark, Damin had never tasted musky. Had never tasted it, but he could smell it even from here. The nauseatingly musky, almost fungal scent took the edge off his appetite for a while. If he had his holochart aligned correctly, the transports were all heading for the regional depot at Teklet. He twisted the image this way and that in his hands, and held it up to map onto the actual landscape. Yes, he was sure enough now where he was. He was 10 clicks east of the small town called Emblani, about 40 clicks northeast of RV Point Beta and 40 clicks almost due east of RV Point Gamma. They'd pick RV points along the flight path because the separatists would expect dispersal, not a retracing of their steps. Between RVs Alpha and Beta was a stretch of woodland, ideal for moving undetected by day. If the rest of his squad had landed safely and were on schedule, they would be making their way to Beta. Things could be looking up again. All he had to do was get to RV Gamma and wait for a squad. And if they hadn't made it, then he'd need to rethink the mission. The idea produced a feeling of desolation. You are nothing on your own, and everything together. He had been raised to think, function, even breathe as one of a group of 4. He could do nothing else. But Arcs always operate alone, don't they? He pondered that. Fighting off drowsiness. Leaves rustled suddenly behind him, and he turned to scan with the infrared filter of his visor. He caught a blur of moving animal. It fled. His database said there were no large predators on Kulora, so whatever it was could be no more troublesome than the Gedans. Not as long as he was wearing his armor anyway. Daman waited motionless for a few moments, but the animal was gone. He turned back and refocused on the road and the surrounding fields, struggling to stay awake. Lay off the stims. No, he wasn't going to touch his medpack for a quick boost. Not yet. He'd save his limited supply for later, for when things got really tough, as he knew they would. Then something changed in his field of vision. The frozen tableau had come to life. He flipped down the binoc filter for a closer look, and what he saw made him snap it back and gaze through the sniper scope of his rifle. A thin wisp of smoke rose from a group of wooden buildings. It was quickly becoming a pall. It wasn't the smoke of domestic fires. He could see flames, flaring tongues of yellow and red. The structure's bonds, judging by their construction, were on fire. A group of people in drab clothing was scrambling around, trying to drag objects clear of the flames, uncoordinated, panicking. Another group, UBs, Trandoshans, mainly Reekway, was stopping them, standing in a line around the barn. One of the farmers broke the line and disappeared into a building. He didn't come out again, not as long as Daman watched. Nothing in his training corresponded to what he was witnessing. There was not a memory, a pattern, a maneuver, or a lesson that flashed in his mind and told him how this should be played out. Civilian situations were outside his experience, nor were the citizens of the Republic. They weren't anyone's citizens. His training taught him not to be distracted by outside issues, however compelling. But there was still some urge in him that said, do something. What? His mission, his reason for staying alive, was to rejoin his squad and thwart the nanovirus project. Breaking cover to aid civilians cut across all of that. The Separatists, or whoever controlled this band of assorted thugs, knew he was here. It didn't take a genius to work it out. The sprayer had exploded on landing, detonating any demolitions ordnance that Dahlman hadn't been able to cram into his packs. The Requay Patrol hadn't called in when their masses had expected. Now the humans' farmers were being punished and threatened, and it was all to do with him. The Separatists were looking for him. Escape and evasion procedure. No, not yet. Dahlman inhaled and leveled his rifle carefully, picking out an obese in the crossfires. Then he lined up the rest of the group, one at a time. 8 hostiles, 40 rounds. He knew he could slot every one, first time. He held his breath, forefinger resting on the trigger, just a touch. How many more targets were there that he couldn't see? He'd give away his position. This isn't your business. He exhaled and relaxed his grip on the rifle, sliding his forefinger in front of the trigger guard. What would happen to his mission if they caught him? In the next 2 minutes, reluctant to move, he targeted each obese, Requay, and Trandoshans several times, but didn't squeeze the trigger. He wanted to more than he could have imagined. It wasn't the hard-drilled, trained response of a sniper, but a helpless, impotent anger whose origin he couldn't begin to identify. Don't reveal your position. Don't fire unless you can take out the target. Keep firing until the target is down and stays down. And then there were times when a soldier just had to make a chance. They could be Republic citizens one day. They could be allies now. Dahlman wasn't tired anymore, or even hungry. His pulse was pounding loud in his ears, and he could feel the constrictions in his throat muscles. The fundamental human reflex to flee or fight. Fleeing wasn't an option. He could only fight. He targeted the first Requay, a clean headshot, and squeezed the trigger. The creature dropped, and for a moment his comrades stared at the body, unsure of what had happened. Dahlman had nothing against Requays. It was only coincidence that this was the third one he'd kill in a few hours. And suddenly, unfrozen, the band of thugs all turned to stare in the directions of the shot. Drawing their weapons, The first bolt hit the bushes to Damon's left. The second went 3 meters over his head. They'd worked out where he was, all right. Damon snapped on the DC-17's grenade attachment and watched through the scope as the civilians scattered. The grenade sent a shower of soil and shattered wood into the air, along with 4 of the 8 militia. He'd certainly pinpointed his positions now. When he sprang to his feet and began the run down the slope, the 4 remaining enemies stood and stared for a couple of seconds. He had no idea why, but they were transfixed long enough for him to gain the advantage. A couple of plasma bolts hit him, but his armor simply took it like a punch in the chest, and he ran on, laying down a hail of particle rounds. The bolts came toward him like horizontal luminous rain. One Trandoshan turned and ran. Daman took him down with a bolt in the back that blew him a few meters farther as he fell. Then the white-hot rain stopped, and he was running over bodies. Daman slowed and pulled up, suddenly deafened by the sound of his own panting breath. Maybe they'd managed to report his presence via their comlinks in time, and maybe they hadn't. The information wouldn't have been much use on its own anyway. He ran from barn to barn, checking for more hostiles, walking through the flames unscathed because his armor and bodysuit could easily withstand the heat of a wood fire. Even with the visor, he couldn't see much through the thick smoke, and he moved quickly outside again. He glanced at his arm. Smoke curled off the soot-blackened plates. Then he almost walked straight into a youth in a farmer's smock, staring at him. The boy bolted. Daman couldn't find any more of Hulkin's troops. He came to the last barn and booted the door open. His spot lamp illuminated the dim interior and picked out 4 terrified human faces. 2 men, a woman, and the boy he'd just seen, huddling in a corner next to a threshing machine. His automatic response was to train the rifle on them until he was sure they weren't hostiles. Not every soldier wears a uniform, but his instincts said these were just terrified civilians. He was still trailing smoke from his armor. He realized how frightening he looked. A thin, wavering wail began. He thought it was the woman, but it seemed to be coming from one of the men. A man just as old as Sergeant Skirata, who was staring at him in horror. Daman had never seen civilians that close, and he'd never seen anyone that scared. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "Is this your farm?" Silence, except for that noise the man was making. He couldn't understand it. He'd rescued them from their attackers, hadn't he? What was there to fear? "How many troops has Hoken got? Can you tell me?" The woman found her voice, but it was shaky. "What are you?" "I'm a soldier of the Republic. I need information, ma'am." "You're not him." "Who? Hokan?" "No." "Do you know where he is?" She pointed south in the directions of Imbrani. They're down at the farm the Kermay clan used to own before Hokan sold them to Trandoshan's. About 50, maybe 60 of them. What are you going to do to us? Nothing, ma'am. Nothing at all. It didn't seem to be the answer they were expecting. The woman didn't move. He brought them here, looking for him, said the man, who wasn't whining, pointing to Dahman. We've got nothing to thank him for. Tell him to... Shut up, the woman said, glaring at the man. She turned it back to Dahman. We won't say a word. We won't say we saw you. Just go. Get out. We don't want your help. Dahman was totally unprepared for the reaction. He'd been taught many things, but none of his accelerated learning had mentioned anything about ungrateful civilians. Rescues thereof. He backed away and checked outside the barn door, before darting from barn to bush to fence and up the slope to where he'd left his gear. It was time to move on. He was leaving a trail behind him now. A trail of engagements and bodies. He wondered if he'd see civvies, as Karata called them, in quite the same benign way in the future. He checked the chrono readout in his visor. It had been only minutes since he had run down the slope, firing. It always felt like hours. Hours when he couldn't see anything but the target in front of him. Don't worry, Scarletta had said. It's your forebrain shutting down. Just a fear reflex. You're bred from sociopathic stock. You'll fight just fine. You'll carry on fighting when normal men have turned into basket cases. Dahman was never sure if that was good or not, but it was what he was, and he was fine with that. He loaded his extra pack on his back and began working his way to the RV point. Maybe he shouldn't have expended so many rounds. Maybe he should have just left the farmers to their fate. He'd never know. Then it struck him why both the militia and the civilians had frozen when they first spotted him. The helmet, their armor. He looked like a Mandalorian warrior. Everyone must be terrified of Gez Hokan. The similarity would either work to his advantage or get him killed. Down, Aten yelled. Nina flung himself flat and heard Phi grunt as he did the same. The air knocked from his lungs. An airspeeder flew overhead, with a deceptively gentle hum. Aten squatted in the cover of a fallen tree, followed it with his rifle scope. "Two up, camo, and custom armament," he said. "Somehow I don't think the locals drive those. Not with mounted cannons anyway." The hum of engines faded. Nina struggled to his feet and regained his balance. Wishing for the speed of bikes and an absence of armor. The squad was too heavily laden, and the armor wasn't designed for blending into the landscape. Although it was the difference between life and death in hostile territory. Protection against blaster fire, nerve agents, and even hard vacuum. And when they got to their target, it would come into its own. The armor was designed for fibula ops. Fighting in built-up areas and inside buildings, urban warfare, of the kind the galaxy now had plenty to offer. For now, they just have to make the best of the scenic part of the mission. He was tired. They all were. Not even the animal panic brought on by the risk of discovery could shake that off. They needed to sleep. Niner checked his datapad. They were still 10 clicks from RV Beta, and it was midday. It was much easier to move by night. So he wanted to press on and make the RV point by mid-afternoon. Then lie up until nightfall. If Darman had made it, and maybe he hadn't, but Niner's mind was made up, they would wait for him. "He is back," Atten said. "Everyone down." The quiet drone of engines interrupted Niner's calculations. The airspeeder was heading south toward them again. They froze, mud smeared, invisible from that altitude, or so they hoped. It wasn't entirely training that produced the reaction. Aerial surveillance was especially threatening. Niner recalled the Kaminoan's KE-8 enforcer craft cruising above the training grounds of Tipoca City, ready to pluck out and discipline any defective clone who didn't conform. They were equipped with electroshock devices. He'd seen a KE-8 in action just once. After that, he worked extra hard to conform. "He's on a square search," Etten said. He was turning into an excellent point man. For some reason, he was slightly more attuned to his surroundings than Phi or even Niner himself. He must be working out from the center. Center of what, though? Phi asked. Niner forgot his fatigue. "You never leave your mates behind. If he hasn't seen us, he's seen Darman. Or what's left of him. Shut it, Aten. What's your problem?" "I've been Darman," Aten said. He said nothing more. Niner didn't think it was a good time to ask for an explanation. The engines were overhead. Then the sound faded a little and dropped in pitch, but soon resumed full volume. "He's circling," Aten said. "Fierfek," Niner said, and all three men reached for their anti-armor grenade attachments at the same time. "What's he seen?" "Maybe nothing," Phi said. "Maybe us." They fell silent. The airspeeder was indeed circling. It had also dropped lower and was now about level with the tops of the trees. Niner could see its twin canyons. His helmet wasn't telling him it had locked on, but that didn't mean it hadn't. You could never count on tech. Best piece of gear is the eyeball. It was the first piece of advice Karata had ever given him. Accelerated learning was fine, but anything direct from the mouths of men who had fought real engagements left a bigger impression. Niner leveled his rifle and peered through the scope, trusting to Blast Tech Industries that the sight really wasn't reflective. He'd find out the hard way if it was. He could see the sun glinting off the human pilot's goggles. The gunner was a droid. He wondered if they felt vulnerable, without any armored canopy. Heads conveniently skylined for shot. He suspected that anyone looking down from that height with a cannon or two didn't feel vulnerable at all. The fuselage banked above him and turned slowly, rising well above the trees as if the pilot was trying to get a visual fix again. It wasn't coincidence. Nina kept the DC-17 trained on the central propulsion unit. Then a red flashing symbol went off in his visor. The thing had a lock on him. He squeezed the trigger. The white-hot blast kicked his visor into blackness for an instant, and the detonation was so close that the shock wave hit him like a body blow. He scrambled to his feet and ran. How he ran with more than 50 kilos of deadite on his back, he would never know. But adrenaline could do remarkable things. His instinct was to get clear before debris rained down on him. Armor and bodysuits could withstand a lot, but the human instinct buried deep inside him screamed get clear. When he stopped, he had covered 100 meters, even in the tangled undergrowth of the cap ice. He was panting like a moth, and the suit was struggling to cool him down. Behind him, a fire burned, with smaller flames scattered around it like ceilings around a tree. He turned to look for Phi and Atin. His first thought was that he had brought the speeder crashing down on them. Did you have to? Phi was right next to him. He hadn't heard him above the noise of his own breathing. He got a lock on me, Nina said, feeling relieved and then oddly guilty, but not sure why. I know I saw you, Dees, go up, and I thought I'd better get moving, or I'd be wearing a speedy. Atin, can't hear him. That didn't mean anything. The close-range comm setting was only 10 meters. Atin could be anywhere. Nina didn't know him well enough yet to guess his movements, and it had been enough of a close shave for him not to spend much time contemplating the issue. Now he was worried that he, the sergeant, the man they looked to for leadership, had run for it without thinking of them, and that they knew it. This is going to make a nice marker, Phi said, staring up at the climbing smoke. It would be visible for long, long away. What did you expect me to do? Lie there and take a cannon's round? No, Sarge. I thought you'd manage a double tap, though. He laughed. Better make sure nobody survived. It was a remote chance, but speeders could be surprisingly robust. Nina and Phi walked back through the smoke, rifles ready. Droid parts were scattered across the scene of devastation. One scuttle-shaped faceplate staring up at the pall of smoke as if in surprise. They don't bounce much, then, Phi said, and moved it with his boot. Atin, Phi here. You there? Over. Silence. Phi put his left gauntlet against his ear. Nina wondered if he's now lost 2 men in as many days. Atin here. Over. Atin stepped out of the smoke, dragging his extra pack in a scorched hunk of metal that trailed a few wires and plugs. It looked like the speeder's onboard computer. The pilot didn't bounce either, he said. Here, help me get this strapped on again. It took both Fi and Nina to lift the pack and reattach it to his armor. A few days earlier, either one of them could have managed it single-handed. "We're too exhausted to be safe," Nina thought. "Time we got out of here and got some rest." "I might be able to get something from this," Atten said, indicating the charred metal box in one hand. It was the first time Nina had heard him sound remotely cheerful. It didn't seem to relate to gear better than he did to people. With a try, Nina took over the point position, and they struggled into denser cover. He glanced back and hoped the flames would burn themselves out. They didn't have a hope of outrunning a full-scale forest fire. But maybe that was the least of their problems. And if Doman was alive and anywhere near, he'd see their handiwork, and Nina hoped he'd recognize it as such. The squad had now left a couple of telltale marks of combat on the sleepy rural landscape. Whether it wanted it or not, Quilora was involved in the war. "You're a die cut," Hoken said. He took off his helmet. His face was centimeters from the UBC's, and he wanted it to look him in the eye. As a species, they weren't prone to trembling, but this one was doing a fine job of being an exception. "What are you?" he whispered. "A Dekut, sir." "You've made me look like a Dekut, too. I don't like that." Hoken had assembled his entire senior staff in the room. He reminded himself that the room was in fact a disused, merely shed, and that his lieutenants were the 20 least stupid individuals selected from the criminal detritus that had washed down society's sewer to Quilora. It disappointed him that the Namodians would spend as much on secure communications and so little on personnel. A few credits more, and he could have bought the small army he needed. The Ubis Kalish was standing absolutely still in the middle of the room as Hoken circled. It might have been a female, because you never could tell with Ubis, but Hoken suspected it was male. He hadn't wanted to hire Ubis. They could be unpredictable, even sly. But very few mercenaries wanted to work on Quilora, and those who did were simply unemployable anywhere else. Almost always because of a criminal record even a Hutt would balk at. And here he was, paying them what he could because Ankit wouldn't fork out for proper support. Hoken despaired. And when he despaired of professional standards, he suspected extreme coaching was necessary to refocus the team. "So you torched another farm," he said. "It was a warning, sir, in case they got ideas. You know, hiding people they shouldn't." "No, that's not how it works." Hoken propped his backside against the edge of the table and stared into the anonymous mask face, arms folded. He didn't like people whose eyes he couldn't see. You warn them first. If they break the rules, then you punish them. If you punish them before they break the rules, they have nothing to lose. And they hate you. And they will seek revenge. And so will their offspring. Yes, sir. Do you understand that? Hoken looked around at the assembled staff and spread his arms in invitation to join the coaching session. Does everyone understand that? There were some grunts. Does everyone understand that? Hoken snarled. What do we say when an officer asks you a question? Yes, sir. It was almost a chorus. Good, Hoken said quietly. He stood up again. Then he took out Fulia's lightsaber, activated the beam, and sliced it through the beast's neck, sending the head flying, bloodless, quite and clean. There was sudden and absolute silence. The staff had been quiet before, but they'd been making the marginal noises of people forced to endure a boring lesson. Now there was not the slightest swallow, cough, or sigh. Nobody breathed. He peered down at the body, and then at the legs of his dark gray uniform trousers. Perfectly clean, no blood. He rather liked this lightsaber now. He sat back on the edge of the desk. That, Hoken said, was punishment for Kalish. It's a warning for the rest of you. Now is the difference clear? It's very important. Yes, sir. Fewer voices joined in this time. And they wavered. Then go and find our visitors. And you, Mukit, clear up this mess. You're a beast. You understand the proper way to dispose of the remains. The group began filing out, and Mukit edged over to the neatly sundered body of Kalish. Hoken caught the arm of his senior Weequay lieutenant as he tried to slip through the door. Gutane, where's your brother and his friend? He asked. They haven't shown up for 2 meals, and they haven't signed off shift. Don't know, sir. Are they making a few credits on the side with that Trandoshan? A bit of freelance slaving? Sir, I need to know to work out if anything unusual might have happened to them. Gutane, no doubt recalling what Hoken had done to him when he chased that farm girl, moved his lips soundlessly. Then his voice managed to surface above his fear. I never seen, sir. Not at all. Not since yesterday, I swear. I chose you as my right hand, man, because you could very nearly express yourself in several syllables, sir. That makes you an intellectual among your kind. Don't make me doubt my judgment. Not seen him, sir. Honest, never. Then get out on the route they were patrolling and see what you can find. Hoken reached across his desk and took out the electroshocker. It was only an agricultural instrument for herding, but it worked fine on most non-animal species. Gutane eyed it cautiously. This is why I disapprove of undisciplined acts like thieving and drinking. when I need to be certain of someone's whereabouts, I can't be. When I need resources, they're already committed. When I need competence, my staff is distracted. He paused the shocker up into the Reequay's armpit. There is a Republic presence here. We don't know the size of the force, but we do have a speeder down and a large black crater at Imbrani. The more data I have, the more I can assess the size of the threat and deal with it. Understood? Yes, sir. Hoken lowered the shocker and the Reequay shut out the door, his enthusiasm for his career refreshed. Hoken prided himself on motivational skills. It started, he thought. He shut himself in his room and switched on all the comlink screens. They are coming to take Creolora. Hoken had some idea of what kind of deal Ankit had with the Separatist. There had been a significant amount of construction work carried out to convert a grain store into the kind of building that had triple steel doors and the type of walls that could be sterilized with extreme heat. Then he had to try to make credible bodyguards out of the rabble he employed, because important Separatist scientists came and went, and the Namodians saw conspiracy everywhere. They looked. They weren't always wrong about that. Then the Jedi came to Imbrani, and it all fell into place as neatly as the arrival of the Republic forces now on the planet. There was a military target here. I'm my father's son, though. I'm a warrior. Hoken wondered if all cultures separated from their heritage were unable to move on, doomed to relive old glories. I'd rather be fighting a worthy opponent than terrorizing farmers who haven't got the guts to stand up for themselves. Fighting soldiers also commanded a higher fee, of course. And the greater the fee, the quicker he would be off this planet and heading somewhere. There was no longer a home for him, and few of his kind left. But things could change. Yes, they very well might one day. Hoken leaned back in the chair and let the chatter of comlinks wash over him. 6. You want to know how clones tell each other apart? Who cares? They're here to fight, not to socialize. Sergeant Cal Scarata. Get out, Brahand yelled. Get out and don't come back. You've brought all this on us. Go on, clear off. The farmer sheed a clod of dirt at Etain, and she sidestepped it. It broke into dust behind her. The old woman who wasn't Burhan's wife, she discovered, came up from behind and grabbed his arm. Don't be a fool, she said. If we take care of the Jedi, then they'll take care of us when the Republic comes. Burhan was still staring at Etain, as if he was debating whether to go and grab his pitchfork. Republic my rump, he said. Them's no different to Nimis when it comes to it. We'll still be bottom of the pile, whoever runs the show. Etain stood with her arms folded, wondering how the old woman, Janot, had managed to attach herself to Burhan's sprawling family. She was an appalling cook and couldn't have been much help with heavy farm labor. Etienne imagined she earned her keep spinning merely wool like the rest of the elderly Creolans she'd met. But right now, Etienne doubted every Junot's powers of persuasion. She decided to try her own again. "Perhaps you want me to stay," she said carefully, concentrating, as Master Follier had taught her. "You want to cooperate with me." "I rotten well don't want to cooperate with you, missy," he said, "and say please." She'd never quite mastered Jedi persuasion when under stress. Unfortunately, that was always the time when she needed it. Junot nudged Burhan's roughly. "No mean feat for such a short woman. If them Jedi have landed, fool, then she'll bring them around here to sort you out," she said. "This is no time to make new enemies. And if they haven't, well, it'll all blow over, and then you'll have someone who can make things grow. That's right, ain't it, girl? Jedi can make crops grow." Etienne watched the display of rustic logic with growing respect. We can harness the force to nurture plants, yes. That was all too true. She had heard the stories of Padawans joining the Agri Corps when they didn't perform well during training. That was all she needed. Life on a backwater planet, talking to fields of grain. It wasn't just the intelligence data she had hidden in her cloak that made her want to get off the planet as fast as she could. Agriculture spelled failure. She didn't need further reminding of her inadequacy. "Yeah," Burhan spat and trudged off, muttering profanities. "We all get nervous when Hoken's thugs start burning down farms," Junot said. She took Etienne's arm and steered her back to the barn that had become her home. No, it wasn't home. There could never be a home for her. No loves, no attachments, no commitments except the Force. Well, at least it wouldn't be hard to tear herself away from here. And killing farmers, of course. "So why aren't you nervous?" Etienne asked. "You're a cautious child." "I have a dead master. It encourages you somewhat." "I have a broader view of life," Junot said. "Not at all like a wool-spinning old woman. Now, you keep yourself safe and don't go wandering about." Etienne was developing a Nemodian level of paranoia, and wondered if even her own instincts were deceiving her. She had at least always been able to sense another's emotions and conditions. "So they know where to find me," she said, quietly testing. Junot stiffened visibly. "Depends on who they might be," she said, wafting the pungent scent of Merle as she walked. "I don't care for your call much, and at my time of life there's little left to covet." "You said that they were coming." "I did indeed." "I have no patience for riddles." "Then you should have, and you should also be reassured because they are here and they'll help you. But you also need to help them." Etienne's mind raced ahead. His stomach nodded. No, she was falling for carnival fortune teller's tricks. She was adding her own knowledge and senses to vague generalities, and seeing meanings where there was none. Of course, Junot knew strangers had arrived. The whole of Umbrani had known about Master Follier. and it was very hard not to know something that had happened when vessels crash landed on your farm, and when every hiding hole in the area was being searched by Hogan's militia. For some reason or another, Janot was playing a guessing game. "When you specify something, I'll take you seriously," Etain said. "You should be less suspicious," Janot said slowly. "And you should look at what you think you see much more carefully." Etain opened the barn door, and the scent of straw and bark tumbled out, almost solid. She felt suddenly calmer and even hopeful. She had no idea why. Perhaps Janot was naturally reassuring, as comforting as a grandmother, despite all her odd talk. Etain couldn't actually remember a grandmother or any of her biological family, of course. Family wasn't familiar or soothing, because she had grown up in a commune of Jedi novices, educated and raised and cared for by her own kind. And by that she never meant human. But family, even from what she had seen briefly of squabbling farmers' clans, suddenly seemed desirable. It was difficult to be alone right then. "I wish I had time to educate you in survival," Janot said. "That task will have to fall to someone else. Be ready to come with me when it gets dark." Janot was becoming much more articulate. She was more than she appeared to be. Etain decided to trust the old woman, because she was the nearest she had to an ally. She still had her lightsaber after all. Darman came to the edge of the wood and found himself facing an open field the size of Camino's oceans. It seemed like, anyway. He couldn't see the boundary on either side of him, just straight across where the trees began again. The rows of grain, steel gray, shining, sighing in the wind, were only waist high. He was 30 clicks east of RV Gamma, desperate to reach it and get some sleep, while waiting for the rest of the squad. Following the cover of the hedge, wherever that might take him, would cost him a lot of time. He opted to take the direct route. He removed one of the 3 micro remotes from his belt pack and activated it. The tiny viewing device was about the size of a pygmy Hummer, small enough to grasp in his palm, and he set it to scout the area for 5 kilometers around him. He didn't like using them unless he absolutely had to. On a planet like this, their shiny metallic coating was hardly geared towards stealth. They also had a tendency to go missing, and because they recorded as well as transmitted, they were one of the last things he wanted to let fall into the enemy's hand. But he wasn't exactly invisible either. He glanced down at his filthy armor, streaked with dried mud, wet green moss, and far, far worse, and knew he was still a big plastoid alloy industrial object in a gentle organic environment. He lowered himself onto all fours, adjusting his balance carefully so the packs sat squarely down the length of his back. His knees still hurt. Crawling through a field wasn't going to help it. "The sooner you get there, the sooner you rest. The remote soared vertically into the air, playing back a rapidly shrinking view of the field, then the wider landscape of farmland and woods, all within Damon's visor display. There were no buildings as far as he could see. That didn't necessarily mean the area was deserted. Crawling with his packs generated a lot of heat, but the bodysuit regulated it obediently. The armor systems had more pluses than disadvantages. He didn't have to worry about wildlife waiting to bite, sting, poison, infect, or otherwise ruin his entire day. But it was slowly going. He had to loop wide if he was going to avoid the little town and Brawny. In fact, the whole day had been one of slow progress, although the only timetable he could latch on to now was that of his comrades, and how long it would take them to make Alvi Gamma. Then they'd move on if he didn't show by the appointed time. After that, they were off the chart, so to speak. It would be a matter of regrouping and gathering enough intel to take the target. Darman suspected it would take longer than a few days. A lot longer. He had started making notes of what local flora and fauna might be edible, and the positions of springs and watercourses that hadn't shown up on the high-altitude Risi. He wondered if the Gadans made decent eating. He reckoned it might not be worth trying. Every so often he paused to kneel and sip some water from his bottle. His stomach's fantasies were no longer of sizzling nuff strips, but of sweet-filling sticky amber ooge cake. It was a rare treat. His twinning sergeant had allowed his original squad, to try it, breaking the Kaminoan's rules on feeding clones. Carefully balanced nutritional mixes. "You're still just boys," he told them. "Fill your boots." And they had. Good old Cal. The flavor was still achingly vivid in Damon's mind. He wondered what other normal civilian indulgences he might enjoy if he had access to them. He slapped the thought down hard. His discipline was his self-esteem. He was a professional. He still thought about that ooge cake, though. "Come on, get moving," he said, very tired of the absences of comrades. Voices and seeking comfort in his own. He would be his commanding officer, just to stay sharp. Shift it. The remote continued to relay predictable images of bucolic peace, neat patchworks of fields punctured by the wild, tangled woods, reminders of an unsettled and untamed world. There were no giant harvester droids out yet. At one point, he thought he saw a dark form moving through the field some way to his left, but when he focused on it, there was simply a gap opened by the wind. Then there was a sudden patch of darkness in his visor. Darman stopped dead. The thing had malfunctioned, but the image returned, glowing red and red, and he realized he was looking into the digestive tract of a living creature. Something had swallowed the remote. A few moments later, a large bird, slowly flapping four wings, sailed overhead and cast an alarming shadow before him. He glanced up. It was probably the same kind that had been sucked into the nauseous sprayer's Atmos engine. "I hope it gives you gut-ache, you scumbag," he said, and waited for it to dwindle to a black speck before moving on. It took more than half an hour to reach the other side of the field, and he still had 25 clicks to go to the RV point. He decided to go north of the town, although he shouldn't have risked moving by day at all. Get there early. Wait for them just in case they decided I'm dead, and they don't hang about. He eased into the bushes, scattering small creatures that he could hear but not see, and considered taking off his packs just for a moment's relief. But he knew that would make it much harder to move when he slotted them back into place again. Exhausted, he fumbled in his belt for a ration cube and chewed, willing the nutrients to hit the bloodstream as fast as they could before he slumped into sleep and didn't get up again. Lights danced in front of his eyes. Fatigue was giving him a heads-up display of its own. The last of the cube dissolved in his mouth. "Come on, soldier. Haul it up," he said. Playing mind games could keep him going. The trick was to remember where the game ended, and then snap back to reality. Right then, he decided to let his commander self shout him into action. "Sir," he said, and sprang up from a kneeling position in one move. He tottered slightly when his knees locked out, but he stayed upright and leaned against the tree. He made a mental note that he needed to keep better hydrated. It was so dark in the wood that his night vision kicked in from time to time, superimposing ghostly green images on the trunks and branches. He'd grown used to the range of animal sounds and the occasional whisper of leaves or snap of twigs blended into the pattern of what his brain was cataloging as NFQ, normal for Kiora. From time to time, a slightly abnormal snap or rustle would make him drop to a squat and turn, rifle ready. But he was clear. He followed the river on his holo chart for part of the way, although it was actually more of a stream. The faint trickle of liquid over rocks was reassuring in the way that the sound of water could be, and after an hour he came upon a break in the tree canopy that allowed sunlight to filter down on the stream in slanted shafts. Brilliantly colored insects circled and danced above the surface. Darwin had never seen anything quite like it. Yes, he knew all about geological formations and what they foretold for soldiers. Sources of water, treacherous scree, risk of landslide, caverns to shelter in, high ground for defense, passes to block, accelerated learning packaged the natural world for him and explained how he could use it to military advantage. But nobody told him it looked so nice. He had no words for it, like the ooze cake. It was a glimpse of another world that wasn't his. Sit down and rest. You're too tired. You'll start making fatal mistakes. It was weakness talking. He shook his head rapidly to clear it. No stims. No, not yet. He had to press on. The insects kept up a constant circuit of the stream, like we see aircraft, circling, seeking. He was hours ahead. Stop. No sleep. Makes you careless. You can't afford to be careless. It did sound like common sense. It wasn't the game voice, his imaginary commander, giving him orders. It felt deep within him. Instinct. And it was right. He was making slower and slower progress, and he had to concentrate on putting one foot in front of the other. He stopped and unclipped one pack, then the other. It was a good enough place to camp. He filled his water bottle and hauled a few half-decayed logs into place to build a defense sangha, just as Sergeant Cal had taught them. It was only a low defensive circle of rocks, or whatever came to hand, but it made a difference on a battlefield when you couldn't dig in. He sat in the walled hollow he had created, staring at the water. Then he cracked the seal on his helmet and breathed unfiltered air for the first time in many hours. It smelled complex. It wasn't the air conditioning of Tipoca City, and it wasn't the dry, dead air of Geonosis. It was alive. Tommen released all the grip-shun panels on his armor and stacked the plates inside the circle of the sangha, set his helmet to detect movement, and left it on the makeshift wall. Then he peeled off his bodysuit section by section and rinsed it in the flowing water. The day was surprisingly warm. He'd had no way of telling what it felt like while he was sealed in the suit. Just the ambient environment data on his display. But the water was shockingly cold when he stepped in. He washed quickly, sat in the pool of sunlight to dry off, and then replaced the panels of bodysuit. They dried a lot more quickly than he had. Before he let himself nod off, he put his armor back on. There was no sense in getting used to the pleasant sensations of not wearing it. It was drilled so thoroughly into him that he was surprised he'd thought otherwise, even for a second. In enemy territory, you slept in full gear, with your blaster ready. He cradled his rifle in his arms, leaned back on his pack, and watched the insects dancing on the sunlit water. They were hypnotically beautiful. Their wings were electric blues and bright vermilion, and they wove a figure eight. Then one by one, they dropped down and floated on the surface, drifting with the current, still wonderfully vivid, but now apparently dead. Darman reacted, airborne toxin. He shut his eyes tight, puffed out the air in his lungs, and snapped his helmet back into place, drawing breath again only when the seal was secure, and his filtration mask could take over. But there was no data on his visor to indicate a contaminant. The air was still clean. He leaned out and scooped up a couple of the insects caught in an eddy. One kicked a leg a few times, and then was still. When he looked up, there was none left flying. It seemed sad. What bothered him more was that it seemed inexplicable. Curious, he fumbled for an empty ration cube container and dropped the insects into it to consider them later. Then he closed his eyes and tried to doze, rifle ready. But sleep eluded him. His helmet detected movement and woke him every few minutes at the intrusion of small creatures, no threat to him. Once or twice it picked up a Gadan, and he opened his eyes to see glittering points of reflected light staring back at him. The system picked up something larger once, but it wasn't as large as any humanoid in his database, and kept it distant before disappearing. Get some sleep. You're going to need it, son. Dalman wasn't sure if it was his own voice or that of his imaginary commander. Either way, it was an order he was only too willing to obey. Gez Hoken never took kindly to being summoned, but Overlord Quail Uthan had the gift of being charming about it. She invited him to meet her in the research complex. She even sent one of her staff with a speeder to collect him from his offices. Hoken appreciated the gesture. The woman understood how to use power and influence. The Namodian grocer had yet to learn. Uthan was not particularly pretty, but she did have the knack of dressing well. In plain dark robes and carrying herself like an empress. That balanced the scales. What Hoken liked most about her was that while she seemed to know that feminine charm wouldn't override his common sense, she never dropped her seductively reasonable facade. She was a professional, and mutual respect went a long way with him. The fact that she was a scientist with subtle political skills impressed him further still. He could almost forgive the unnatural act of fighting without real weapons. The decaying exterior of farm buildings gave way to reinforced alloy doors and lengthy corridors with what appeared to be emergency bulkheads. Hoken carried his helmet under one arm, unwilling to leave it, or his weapons, with the servant. The wizened man looked local. The locals were all thieves, expecting some grain silo fires then, he said, and prodded the recessed blast bulkheads with his forefinger. Uthan laughed a low, tinkling laugh that he knew he could just as easily switch to a commanding voice and freeze a parade group of troops. "I am grateful you could make the time to see me, General Hokan," she said. "Under normal circumstances, I would never bypass someone with whom I had a contract and speak directly to his subcontractor. It's very rude, don't you think? But I am a little concerned." Ankit wasn't part of this conversation. Hokan began to understand, and she was laying on the flattery with a trowel. "I'm merely, Hokan, a citizen, Let me address your concerns, madame. He felt suddenly foolish. He had no idea what to call her. Mistress Uthan? Doctor will be fine, thank you. How can I reassure you then, doctor? She steered him into a side room and indicated 3 shimmering beige brocade, upholstered chairs clearly imported from Coruscant. He hesitated to sit on such a conspicuously decadent seat, but he did because he would not stand before her like a servant. Uthen took the chair nearest him. You have some idea of the importance of the work I carry out here, I think. Not in any detail, viruses, from the building specifications anyway. He'd policed the construction crews, who were also all thieves. Hazardous materials. If Uthen was surprised, she gave no indications whatsoever. Exactly, she said, and I confess I'm somewhat disturbed by the events of recent days. Lick and Kit assures me my security is guaranteed, but I would really welcome your assessments of the situations. Her tone hardened just a fraction still. Syrup, but now with gritty, sharp crystals in it. Is this projected under any threat? And can you maintain its security? Hokan didn't hesitate. Yes, I believe your facility is vulnerable. He was a master of his trade. He saw no reasons to lose his reputation over restrictions not of his making. And no, I can't guarantee anything with the level of quality of staff that I have. Uthen sat back with controlled slowness. Last matter first. Do you not have the resources to employ them? Ankit's contract is quite generous. That generosity has not filtered down to my operations. Perhaps we should shorten the supply chain in the interest of efficiency. I have no opinion on that, and Kit's welcome to his cut, as long as I have the tools to do the job. That wasn't quite the cut I had in mind for Lick and Kit, she smiled. There was no warmth in it, and you believe that recent incursions are related to this facility. Circumstantial evidence, yes. Hokan returned the smile, and suspected his was a few degrees cooler. If she'd do this to Ankit, she'd do it to him. It's a big planet. Why the Imbrani region? Why send Jedi agents? Have you located any forces? No, I've identified at least 2 points of hard combat and 1 downed vessel, though. Hard contact? Situations when soldiers are actually engaged each other. Not that his rabble of mercenaries raided the distinctions of soldiers. I can't gauge numbers. If I were to arrange for you to have command of separatist droids and their officers from our nearby garrisons, will that make your task easier? I take no sides. I won't lie to you and pretend to support your cause. You have military experience, of course. There's no disgrace in being a mercenary. I'm Mandalorian. It's in my soul as well as part of my education. No, there's no shame in it as long as you give of your best. Uthen suddenly melted into what seemed to be a thoroughly genuine and sympathetic half-smile. I think I should share something with you. It might be distressing. There were still hard edges in her unctuous tone. The Republic has created an army of clone troops. Millions. They have been bred to fight and serve Jedi generals without question, also to be their willing servants. They have they have had no normal life, and they age very rapidly. If they survive being wasted in foolish battles, do you know whose genetic material was used to create these unfortunate slaves? No, I don't. Hoken was never embarrassed to admit ignorance. That was for small men. Tell me. Jango Fett. What? Yes, the finest Mandalorian warrior of his day has been used to churn out cannon fodder for the aggrandizement of the Jedi. If she had spat in his face, he couldn't have been more appalled. He knew she was aware of what would enrage him. She used the emotional term warrior, not bounty hunter. She knew how much the revelation would offend his cultural pride. But she was right to tell him. It was a matter of honor, and more than his own. He would not see his heritage used in this travesty of honest war. I'd take the contract even if you didn't pay me, he said. Ruthen seemed to relax. We can give you up to 100 droids to start with. Ask if you need more. It's a small garrison, because we didn't want to attract attention. But now that we have the attention anyway, we can reinforce if necessary. What about your existing militia? I think layoff notices might be in order. Perhaps your troops might start by helping me with the administrations of that. Uthan blinked for a second, and Hoken realized she had taken longer than usual to understand what he meant. She grasped the meaning. I can be as ruthless as you. She'd think twice before undermining him as she was undermining Ankit. That might be a sensible start, she said. Hoken stood up and held his helmet in both hands. He had always been proud of that tradition. Proud that it hadn't changed in thousands of years, except for a technical enhancement here and there. What really mattered was what lay under Mandalorian armor, a warrior's heart. Would you like to know what virus we are developing here, Major Hokan? Uthan asked. So he has a real rank now, not the flattering, extravagant general. Do I need to? I think so. You see, it's specifically for the clones. Let me see. To make them proper men again. Nothing can do that. This is to kill them. Hoken replaced his helmet carefully. The kindest solution, he said, and meant it.